Whew, some of you feel like maybe we put a microphone in your house, caught a little bit of the discussion that happens behind closed doors. Well, welcome. We are starting a series called Behind Closed Doors, where we're going to talk about what is going on behind closed doors. And truthfully, not all of us know what's happening behind your closed doors, but you do. We know what's happening with our families, with our roommates, with our closest friends. And while God designed us this way, right, He intended for us to be in places where we can land. After a hard day, we can come home. Or when we're growing to be who we need to be, we're in a place that's safe, and then we are sent out into the world. The truth is, sometimes what's happening behind closed doors are things that we don't want to talk about, and we really hope no one ever mics us. Well, that's part of why we need to talk about it. We need to talk about what's happening in our homes, because what happens in our homes carries into our everyday life. So let's address it. And you guys know over the last, can you believe this, 11 months, we have spent more time behind closed doors than probably ever before in our life. And while some of that has been a gift and good, we're also realizing some habits and some rhythms in our families that maybe aren't the healthiest. So we want to spend time talking about it. We want to spend time addressing what's going on there and having some honest conversations about how to grow to make our homes safe so that our kids want to come home and talk about life instead of running away from them. We want it to be a place where we can launch people into the world, not a place that we avoid. Before we can do that, though, we need to start with God. We need to start by asking Him to come into our homes and kind of guide us, because for some of us, we have a lot of baggage, whether it be from our childhood homes, whether it be from the homes we're in now. We have a lot going on that has hurt us or kept us doubting the behind closed door life and maybe avoiding addressing some of it. So today is a reset. No matter where you've been, no matter what's happened today, let's just hit that reset button and start fresh with our families. So let's just ask God to jump into that. Will you guys pray with me? God, thank you. Thank you for being someone who doesn't send us into the world and expect us to figure it all out on our own. Thank you for being a God who designed us to land somewhere, to become who we need to be somewhere, to be surrounded by people because you knew we would need them, even if they drive us nuts. And God, more than that, thank you for being the constant. When our homes aren't always the safest place, when the family around us isn't always there, you are. So today, God, will you just speak to our hearts? Will you remind us how we can grow to become safe people? Will you remind us how we can lean into you in this season? And will you help us just take a deep breath and move into a new season with our families? In your name we pray. Amen. So I grew up in a pretty normal home, and then, when you turn 18, you leave the nest. For me, I left the nest and went to college. And when I went to college, I thought I was pretty normal until I got into the dorms and realized, oh wait, your family doesn't do that? That's just my family? I'm the only weird one? Cool, got it. Well, we asked you that question in the pre-service show because I want to make sure I'm not the only odd one. What's the weirdest thing that your family does that you realized not all families do? And you guys gave us some answers. Sophia says, singing phrases of songs after we accidentally say them. Thank you, Sophia. I agree. This is great. Heather said, our family gives silly string to the kids in their Christmas stockings for a silly string fight. That's awesome. Catherine says, my family has a no pets in the house rule, even when my dad was building our house and the floor was concrete. I'm so sorry, Catherine. You can visit my pets. They're great. All of our families have some weird quirks, and I didn't necessarily know right away. This week, I actually texted my brothers, and I was like, what are the weird things we do? And they were like, well, we eat chips and salsa with cream cheese, or with Greek yogurt, or with cottage cheese. I didn't know that wasn't normal until this week, so thank you guys for that one. But for me, the really big thing that I learned was my most recent roommate went to the drawer with all the silverware in it and opened it and goes, Kelsey, why is there a bunch of plasticware in here? I had metal silverware, but for some reason there's also plasticware. And it was in that moment that I realized not everybody goes out to eat and takes the utensil home and washes it and uses it until it breaks in ice cream 3 months later. For me, it's plastic spoons. I love plastic spoons. So if I find a good one, I'm going to keep it. So I have a lot of Chipotle spoons because they are amazing. If you don't, go try it. It's fantastic. But that was one of the weird quirks that I realized my family has, and there are a lot more, but it wasn't just quirks. When I moved into the dorms and had my first fight with my college roommate, which is never a fun experience, I realized she says everything. She just says exactly what's wrong and doesn't hold back. And I went, whoa, 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 that's not how we do this. Because in my family system, we didn't just say it how it was. We didn't just come out and blurt out what was wrong. It starts with spoons in the drawer, and it moves into how we behave and conduct ourselves around other people. Does your family yell, or is your family passive aggressive? Is your family all about all of the emotions all the time and everyone feels what they need to, or do you guys stuff it down and pretend nothing's going on? Well, those habits go with us. When we move to college and we get our own places and we start our own families, those habits go with us. And they begin to impact our relationships with other people, which is why it's super important to talk about what happens in our homes. Because what happens behind closed doors will eventually leave and enter into the world, into our other relationships. So let's talk about what it looks like. And let's learn, let's grow to change how we interact with one another, to become safe people. Here's the deal. Safe people put the relationship over being right. I know we like to be right. I know we like to have all the answers, but safe people put relationships first. And that takes work. The good news is there's a story in the Bible about this guy named Job. It's one of the first books of the Bible written, and it's all about this guy who had everything and then with one day had nothing. And we get to watch behind his closed doors. How often do we get to actually look inside of someone else's home to see what's going on? And we get to see how his wife interacts with him, how his closest friends interact with him. And we get to see how they deal with trauma, how they deal with difficulty. And we get to learn a couple things from them. But to set up the story, we need to know what happened first. Job was a pretty successful guy. He had land, he had animals, his kids were grown up and they were successful. He had a wife and she was amazing. His life looked perfect. And while we see this perfect life being lived over here, we also see God and Satan beginning to have a conversation about what's going on behind closed doors. So God is telling Satan, look at Job. He's amazing. He honors me. He puts me first. He worships me. This is amazing. And Satan says what we often say about people whose lives look perfect from the outside. He goes, well, of course he worships you. He's got everything. His whole world is put together. Things are awesome. And God goes, okay, well, Satan, go ahead and do your worst because Job will still honor me above all. So Satan does. So we get back to Job, who in one day is sitting with his wife in their home, and a servant comes running in the doors and says, hey, I was out in the field when the Sabians came and they took 500 yoke of oxen and 500 donkeys and killed all of the servants that were out in the field. I'm the only one that escaped. I'm the only one left. As he finishes that, another servant comes running in the door. He goes, hey, I was out tending to the sheep when all of a sudden there was a fire and it burned all 7,000 of your sheep and all the servants. I'm the only one that escaped. I'm the only one left. And as he finishes talking, another servant comes in, and the servant says, I was out with the camels, and the Chaldeans came in a raid and took 3,000 camels and killed all of your servants. I'm the only one left. And he's devastated. He just lost his livelihood, his income, his job, everything that he had acquired throughout his life, gone. But it doesn't stop there. Next, another servant comes running in and says, hey, I was out with your sons who were hosting dinner for your sons and daughters, and the house collapsed on top of them. I'm the only one that escaped. All 7 sons, 3 daughters, and the servants gone. It's pretty devastating. Job now not only lost his livelihood, not only lost his work, he now lost almost all of his family except his wife. And he still didn't curse God. He didn't go against God. And so Satan's like, okay, I got one more. The reason he's not complaining yet, the reason he's still honoring God is because he still has his physical health. So at that point, from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head, he's covered in sores and boils. Whew. Behind closed doors, this is a pretty tough situation. This is pretty painful. And in the middle of this pain, we're going to watch different people and how they interact with Job and how they respond to him. And we're going to learn a little bit about how we can respond at home. And the first thing we can learn from Job and his family is stop talking. In the middle of pain, in the middle of crisis, our natural instinct is to speak right away. But there is a time for speaking. This isn't it. Stop talking. Listen. Because our first reaction is often from our own hearts rather than from what they need to hear. In fact, we actually are going to see Job's wife, and Job's wife has also walked through all this pain. She's also lost everything. She's also lost her family. She's also hurting. And so when they're in the middle of this moment and she decides to speak up, what comes out of her mouth is her own reaction to what's going on, not what Job needs to hear. And so she speaks up to him and says some things that are less than kind. She says in Job chapter 2, starting in verse 9, she says, "Then his wife said to him, 'Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die.' But he said to her, 'You speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil?' In all this, Job did not sin with his lips." She opens her mouth, and what comes out of her mouth is not helpful. It's harsh. She says, "Why are you still here? Why are you still trying? You should just give up because there's no point. You've lost everything. This is it. Move on. The end of our story." Because she's reacting, she's speaking out of what is in her heart in this moment, and she is hurting. And I get it, when we speak out of what we're feeling, what comes out is pain, and it is not helpful to the other person. In fact, part of it is she doesn't really know what Job is thinking or feeling. She knows what she is. And when we do that, we give advice out of what we're feeling, not out of what we're hearing. That's not always helpful. But it's easy. Giving a first reaction is easy. Giving advice is easy because it's at the tip of your tongue and you can just spit it out pretty quickly. But not all advice is good. In fact, I have a question for you that I'd love for you to answer in the chat wherever you're watching. The question is, what's the worst advice you've ever received? I'm going to take a guess that all of us have received some decently bad advice at some point in our life. What is the worst you've received? You don't have to tell me if you took it or not. For me, I was in middle school and we were playing football in the gym because it was a rainy day, and I went to go catch the ball and it just kind of went over my head and past me and bounced off the back wall and came towards me. And at the same time, I had to jump over the cone that was the end zone, and somehow miraculously the ball landed right under where my foot landed with all my weight, and my ankle just gave way. And my PE teacher, in her own reaction, in her own response, worried about her own liability, comes up and goes, get up, you're fine, it's okay. Take some ibuprofen and you'll be good. No. I broke my ankle. I wore a cast for the next several weeks, and my ankle still makes little crackly noises to this day. But for her, she wasn't concerned about how I was feeling. She didn't hear what I was saying. Her advice was a reaction of her own emotions, of her own experience. It is really easy when we speak quickly to speak out of what we have rather than what someone else is experiencing. She would have known. I would have said, I can't move it. I heard it crack. But she didn't ask. She jumped in with a response. Instead, we can choose to be safe people. And safe people put the relationship over being right. She just needed to be right and safe and protected and in charge and make sure everything was good, but she could have become a safe person and just listened. Job's wife could have been a safe person had she just listened, but she jumped immediately into her own reaction. When we speak first, we put our experience over top of someone else and don't give them space to have their own. We shut them down. Now, that's bad advice, right? Take some ibuprofen and get over it. It's not great advice, but I have gotten some good advice in my life. One of them was when I was leaving college and going to my first job in a church. One of my professors said to me, Kelsey, if you do all things, that's great, but the most important thing you can do is be present. Be present. Be in the moment. Show up and show all of you up, not just parts of your brain. Be present. And while Job's friends, we're going to see, aren't the greatest at being there for Job, they do start out on a good foot. You see, they heard what was going on, and so the three of them get together and they say, we're just going to go to his house. We're going to go spend time with him and see if we can offer some comfort or just be present with him. And so they do something brilliant. They go behind closed doors to sit with Job in the middle of his pain because they understand the value of their presence. They understand the value of being there. And we all know how good it is to not just text, but to enter into someone's home and sit with them in the middle. And as they do that, we see some good results. Starting in verse 12, it says, and when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him. And they raised their voices and wept. And they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their head towards heaven. So it's a way of mourning, of grieving, of saying dust to dust. It's almost better if we were dead because this pain is so real. It keeps going. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. Twice in these 2 verses, they see what's going on. You see, part of presence is being physically there so that you can see what someone else is going through. They saw him and knew that he was in pain. They saw him and knew to be silent and to just sit and go through these seasons of weeping and silence and weeping and silence. When they saw with their eyes, they knew what to do. They could then enter behind closed doors and be present with him. It's kind of like when you're sitting with someone and you can see in their eyes, or even just that quiver of the lip, that you know they're about to cry. You're present, you see it. Or maybe it's when your kid is saying something to you and they look to the side and you're like, gotcha, there it is, right? Presence allows us to know what the actual experience is. Presence allows us to be attentive to the needs of someone else. It allows us to have this compulsion to respond well. We have to be present. But presence is not just about being physically in the same room. We've spent 11 months physically in the same homes with our family members, with our roommates, with our friends. And it doesn't always mean we're present. Presence is more than just physical presence. It's emotional presence. It's being attentive to the needs, not the phone. How often do we have a movie night with our family and all of us are on our individual devices while there's something going on? We have no idea what's happening in the room. Or sit at dinner and scroll through things. We're going to do a series in a couple weeks called Screen Time, where we're going to have some good conversation around this idea of technology and its place. And maybe for some of us it starts now. Maybe now in the middle of dinner we can say, my phone is not as valuable as what's going on right here. I want to be attentive to you. And you put it down, upside down. And parents, it starts with you. If you model it, your kids will know that you are there with them. If you model it, it's something they can learn as well. And we'll talk about it more, but it is truly something we can start now. Just start with the basket when you're watching TV. Everybody puts their phone in, and you watch together, and you laugh, and you have fun, and you can be present, not just in the same house, but actually present. And it is hard because phones are an easy place to stay distracted, but safe people put the relationship over being right. It's not about what I need. It's not about me having my needs met in that moment. It's about me being a safe person for the people around me because they matter. And I know with COVID, it's been a little weird. You can't just show up at your friend's house and be like, let's do life together because we have to create some boundaries. I get it. But honestly, in the last 11 months, one of the things that's been beautiful is people have still shown up in ways that are new. What if presence was something we were thoughtful about, right? It's the door drop-offs. It's families who are now on Zoom calls who didn't actually talk before in the first place, but now are making an effort to see each other, to be present in a moment. Even for me, my birthday was early on in the stay-at-home order, and 5 different people dropped things off at my door to let me know that I was loved, that I was seen, that I was valued. Presence is so much bigger than just being in a room. It's thinking about the other person. It's taking time to prioritize them. Let's get creative in our homes. Let's get creative in how we sit together, because there's something beautiful that has happened over the last 11 months in how we take care of one another. I asked you guys the question, what's the worst advice you've ever received? And you guys gave some answers. Hoppy said, quit. Just give up. Feels a little bit like maybe Job's wife. That's hard. Jeff said, do it. It only hurts for a little bit. These are great pieces of advice. We've all had moments where we've received really bad advice, the kind of advice that we go, did you just hear what you said? But the reason is because advice is easy. Advice is easy because advice, I can just spit out and move on. I don't have to actually emotionally invest in our relationship. You could say something to me, I give you some advice, and we're done. I don't have to take it to the next level. The problem is, while advice is good, and there is a time to be able to speak truth into someone's life, people want to be heard before they want to be told. People want to know that you heard what was going on. People want to know that you heard their heart before you tell them what to do. And when we don't do that, when we tell before we hear, what happens is we actually leave room for assumptions. When I give you advice before I've actually heard what you're actually going through, I'm assuming that I understand your world. I'm assuming that I know what's happening in your life. I am assuming I know what's happening in your home. I assume a lot. I assume that I can give you the best advice because I think I am good at what I do. There are assumptions that are made when we give advice without listening, and it's dangerous. So don't assume. Ask. Don't assume. Ask. Don't assume that you know what's best for someone. Don't assume you understand their world, because no 2 people experience pain the same way. Don't assume that you understand what's going on behind closed doors. Ask them. Get information. Be attentive to what's going on. Because when we assume, we misdiagnose. When we assume, we rationalize and try and put someone else's pain and suffering into a box that we can understand. And that doesn't actually help them. Job's friends do this. While for a week they get it right and they sit in silence and they weep with him, and there's great amounts of sorrow being felt throughout this week. At the end of this week, people start to speak up. They give up on the stop talking part. And they have a lot of assumptions. One of them is that in early Judaism, there's this idea that if something bad happened to you, it's because you did something bad. If something good happened to you, it's because you did something good. And so in Job's life, if bad things are happening, his friends begin to make assumptions that, well, if these bad things are happening, it's because you did something you weren't supposed to do, so we just need to deal with that. And so they move out of the stop talking phase, and they move out of the be present phase, and they begin to just make a bunch of assumptions, and what they say is painful. In fact, in Job chapter 8, starting in verse 1, it says, "Then Bildad the Shuhite answered and said, 'How long will you say these things, and the words of your mouth be a great wind?'" Essentially, are you still complaining about this? Like, it's been a week, it's time to move on. This is your fault, just move on from it. It keeps going. "Does God pervert justice, or does the Almighty pervert the right?" God is just, he is good. So if this is happening, it's because you did something. And here's the worst, verse 4. "If your children have sinned against him, he has delivered them into the hand of their transgression." If your kids died, it's because they did something to deserve it. They got what was coming to them. Then he finishes off, he says, "If you will seek God and plead with the Almighty for mercy, If you are pure and upright, surely then he will rouse himself for you and restore your rightful habitation. And though your beginning was small, your latter days will be very great. Essentially, he ends by saying, hey, if you just do better, try more, if you love better, if you apologize and move on, then everything will just work out for you. In fact, if you're really good, God will probably make your life even better at the end than it was at the beginning. For someone who just experienced this immense amount of pain, there were all sorts of assumptions made about him. Bildad assumed that what happened to Job was Job's fault, that what happened to Job's kids was their fault. Could you imagine saying, well, that's what they deserved? When we make assumptions, that's the kind of gap we leave. Had they talked to him, had they asked him, hey, why did this happen? How are you feeling? What's going on? Did you do something? How can we address this? He would have been able to say to them, no, I don't know. This is just happening to me. But they left assumptions in the middle. And the words they said were harmful and dangerous. And here's the reality, and we know this reality, but sometimes pain happens. Sometimes there's not this overarching reason. Sometimes there's not a box we can put our suffering into. Sometimes pain happens. And we know this. And I know we're sick and tired of talking about 2020, but in 2020, we learned that pain just happens. In fact, the first 2 months of the stay-at-home order, 20 million people signed up for unemployment. It's one of the highest ever. And then on top of that, over the last year, we've seen depression raise 3 times what it used to be. 3 times in 1 year. And no one would look at someone who lost their job in this season and say, well, you got what was coming to you. No, people who are hardworking, people who had built something in their life just lost their jobs. People who were doing okay just stopped being okay. Why? Because this season is difficult and pain is real. I know specifically with students, it's been difficult to watch because kids that were doing really well in school aren't anymore because school's not the same. Students who were happy-go-lucky are now experiencing depression like never before. This season is hard and the pain is real. And when we are quick to give our advice, when we're quick to give our judgment or our assessment, we miss out on the fact that pain sometimes just happens. And trying to rationalize or predict what will come doesn't actually help anyone. So stop talking, be present, and don't assume, ask. Because safe people put the relationship over being right. You might be right. You might be right that your kid, if they left their room and went outside, would feel a little bit better. You might be right that there's other employment out there. But does it help anyone in the moment? No, what they need is the relationship. What they need is you. What they need is to be heard. They need to be seen. And I know for a lot of these issues, we look at them and go, it's really not that big a deal, right? When someone comes to share something with us, we go, I mean, I've been through worse. It may not feel significant to you, but to them, it's everything. It may not feel real to you, but to them, it has been soul-crushing. And so here's the deal. Even though you might be right on advice, or you might be right on how big or little a problem is, when they come to talk to you, it's not about you. So pause first. Be present. Listen. Ask questions. Don't try and one-up. Don't try and rationalize, because all that does is cut the conversation right there where it is. I know eventually this actually leads to us feeling like it's a personal attack. Like someone coming to you, especially if it's your kids or your spouse, coming to you saying, hey, I have this problem going on. It feels like, oh my gosh, did I fail? And our insecurities come out. I remember one time, one of my friends was in this crazy bout with depression and dealing with stuff in her own home and with her own family. And she came to share what was going on with her. And my insecurity came out and it felt like a personal attack. And my response to her was, have I not been a good enough friend for you? I cut the conversation. She no longer felt like I was a safe person to share what was going on, and I had put me being right over our relationship. But we say it a lot. because it feels personal, because our insecurities leak out. We say things like, am I not enough for you? Have your father and I not loved you enough? Have we not given you the world? Have I not shown up when I said I would show up? Have I not done what I'd said I'd do? We come to it with our own personal feelings, and it actually gets in the way of hearing what the other person is saying because the assumptions have been filled in, because our own baggage is getting in the way of being able to hear what someone else is saying. So how do we give up the personal attack to be present with the person? How do we put the personal attack down and go, even if it is partially my fault, even if our family system is going to have to change things, even if the rules around our house need to change, in this moment, I'm going to put down the personal to listen to what you're saying, to be present, to hear you. And yeah, then there will be change that needs to happen. But when they're talking, they need to be heard first. And I know we all have baggage. I know we all have insecurities that come from somewhere. But we have to find a way to put that down behind closed doors and listen to what our spouses are saying. Not what we think they're saying, what they're saying. We need to be able to listen to what our kids are communicating with us because they are hurting too. We need to be able to put down our own inadequacy and say, let's find a way to work through this together. In fact, I have a question for you, and I want us to wrestle with this question a little bit today. The question is, what are you taking personally that's getting in the way of listening? What are you taking personally that's getting in the way of hearing the person next to you? What insecurity keeps you from truly hearing the needs of the person next to you? In fact, right now, I want us to spend some time talking to God about those things. In order for us to become safe people, we need to put down the advice. We need to put down the need to be right. We need to put down our personal wounds for a moment and listen. And so right now, I'm going to give us a moment, and we're going to put down those things in front of God and say, this is my area of insecurity, and I need you to help me with it so that I can hear my family member. Hey, these are the wounds that are keeping me from truly listening and being attentive to what's happening next to me. So I want you to take a moment. Take a moment right now and just pray. What are you taking personally that's getting in the way of listening? Go to God. God, we all hurt. We all have wounds. We all have baggage. We all have trauma that has come into our current homes with us. But God, we also, in the deepest parts of us, don't want that trauma to keep us from loving the people next to us. And so, God, we need you. We need you to help work through some of that. We need you to help guide us on how to put that down so that we can hear the people next to us, God, because we want to be safe people. We want our home to be a place that people come to rest and to breathe and to share honestly. We want to be filled with homes that are inviting, even in the deepest pain. And so, God, we know that there are times we need to put stuff down. God, will you help us do that? Will you help us put our own personal attack down to be present with the people around us? Will you help us love them well? And God, when it's our turn, when we need to speak up, when we need to say things, when we need to work through things, will you help us be met with those same open ears that we so desire? Will you help our family members be safe people so that we also can share and be bold together? God, help our homes become a space that you bring healing more than hurting, so that we can go into the world and live boldly for you. God, for families that are super broken and hurt right now, will you just provide extra healing in this season right now? And God, as we listen to this next song, I just ask that it's our prayer to you. It's our prayer to you that you would break the unhealthy rhythms, you would break the unhealthy systems, you would break the pride that has kept our family in this shape that it's in now. Will you break what we've created so that you can make us new, so that you can bring healing to our homes? And God, then would you fill every room of our house? Would you be the one that comes in and breathes new life into us and into our living rooms and our kitchens and our bedrooms? God, will you come behind closed doors and bring healing? God, this is our prayer to you. In your name we pray. Amen.